We're lucky today to have some preservation techniques that allow us to eat food all year round. So let's talk about some of the food preservation techniques that we use and what their effect on food is. Let's start with pasteurization. Pasteurization is a heating method that's used to kill bacteria. So foods are heated to a higher temperature, which can kill bacteria. But not all the bacteria is destroyed, so food still needs refrigeration. Some common foods that we see are pasteurized are milk, juices, and you can even purchase pasteurized eggs. Now, related to pasteurization is an ultra high temperature treatment. This actually sterilizes the food, so it kills all the bacteria, and this allows food to be shelf stable so they don't have to be refrigerated. You may have seen boxed milk on the shelves at the store that's not refrigerated. That milk is ultra pasteurized. It does change the flavor a little bit if you've ever tried that milk. Another preservation technique is irradiation. Irradiation is a food preservation method that's been used extensively for 50, 60 years. And what happens in irradiation is the energy passes through food, radiation energy passes through food, and that disrupts bacteria to kill them or limit their growth. So radiation makes our food safer. It makes it safer by killing bacteria. It also controls the growth of insects, fungi, and parasites, and all those things makes our food safer. When food is irradiated, with the exception of spices, which are almost always irradiated, the packaging has to show this Redura logo, and that indicates that the food has been treated with irradiation. Now, some people have concerns over irradiation. One is the fear that the food is actually radioactive and causes harm. That's false. The food does not become radioactive when it's irradiated, just like you don't become radioactive when you pass through a scanner at an airport. Another concern is that the taste or nutrition may change. Irradiation does not change the nutrition content of a food or taste or texture. There is a concern that we have to transport radioactive materials for the manufacturing places that do the irradiation, and with that concern, just workers are trained very carefully to handle the materials. Now let's talk about processing. There are other processing techniques that are more common or more familiar is probably a better way of saying that, such as canning, freezing foods, or drying foods. And these can keep food safe for a long period of time. For example, you can have canned tomatoes on the shelf for a year or longer, but a ripe tomato will spoil within a few days. So while these techniques are very effective at destroying or reducing pathogens that can cause foodborne illness, they may affect nutrition content. So let's talk about them. Let's first talk about canning, which uses heat. That's a very effective method of destroying bacteria. But some vitamins, particularly vitamin C, thiamine, and riboflavin, are very vulnerable to heat, and they may be reduced during canning. Minerals are not affected by heat, and if we can at a high temperature for a shorter period of time, that can retain more nutrients than if we're canning for a longer period of time. Freezing is another method of preserving foods for a longer period of time. With freezing, we have very minimal nutrient loss, and it's actually possible to have higher nutrient content than a fresh food because most frozen foods are frozen immediately after being picked, where if you buy a fresh produce in the grocery store, they may have been transported for a while. So there's possibility that you actually have more nutrient retention. And then drying is another very common food preservation method. With drying, the nutrients are pretty well preserved. And the way drying works to preserve is bacteria don't grow well with water. So we remove the water and the bacteria doesn't grow. Let's take a little deeper look at processing and nutrients. Well, right here we've got a graph on the left, and it's showing the relative amount of time for nutrients to be lost, comparing just being left out in the field, being refrigerated, freezing the food, or canning the food. And you can see that if we have frozen food or canned food, we retain nutrients for a longer period of time. But let's specifically look at an example here. This is vitamin C loss in green beans. And you can see with fresh green beans, if we just leave them out at room temperature, these green beans lost 58% of their vitamin C in 3 days. Here are frozen green beans, and with the processing, they only lost 15 to 20% of the vitamin C, and with canned green beans, again, only losing 15 to 20%. So we retained quite a bit of the nutrients in our preservation techniques of freezing and canning. So when we look at processing food, sometimes people think that processing is bad, but it is not necessarily bad. When we process food, that allows us to increase our food availability. We can have food year round because it's shelf stable, either in the can or in the freezer, or because we dried it. And that increases our variety of foods and our potential of getting the different nutrients from those foods. Processing improves food safety. If we didn't cook meats, we run the risk of getting foodborne pathogens from those meats. Processing increases convenience. How easy is it to get a can of black beans? They're already softened and cooked, and you can put them on a salad or in a soup, as opposed to dried beans, which take a long time to cook. So processing increases convenience. Now, processing can increase nutrients. We fortify some of our foods in the United States. So, for example, cold cereals are fortified with different vitamins. But on the flip side, processing can decrease some nutrients, as we just talked about. With heat or freezing, we may lose a little bit of nutrients. And the best way to get a variety of nutrients is to eat a variety of foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, protein foods, dairy foods, and also to choose a variety of processing or preservation techniques. So eat some fruit fresh, have some canned, have some frozen, have some dried, and that way you'll get a wide variety of nutrients in your diet.